All right, with several hunting seasons currently going on, I thought I would make at least one more quick video here while I had a chance. So, I've been out of state duck hunting and I'm heading back out this evening. I've been doing pretty good, a little slow, but hopefully it gets better. So, as you can tell by the title of the video, I just wanted to do a quick video on some lessons learned, and I just sat down and it literally took me about 3 minutes to write up this list. It's certainly not conclusive or all-inclusive, but it is some of the stuff that we've kind of come across. So if you haven't seen my other videos, I am not from the West. I'm not an elk guide. We started elk hunting, by we, I mean my brother and I, my nephews, some family and friends, 6 years ago out West. So this would be the 7th year, but I didn't put in this year because we had a really good year last year and there's other stuff I needed to do this year. So 7 years ago we started, we've been hunting 6 years. And we've learned a lot. So it's all been self-guided, no guides. I don't have any friends that live out there. We literally had absolutely no help or guidance figuring out how to elk hunt, which was kind of put us at a disadvantage. Thankfully, things have gone pretty well. We've always been safe. Doesn't mean we haven't made mistakes, but no serious injuries, and we've managed to take several elk. So I wanted to go over some things that I've learned along the way. So first thing I've learned, you watch all these videos on elk behavior, patterning elk, what they do in different conditions. And the reality is it really doesn't matter. I hate to say it, but in most public land hunting areas, you are not, putting yourself against the elk. You're putting yourself against other hunters. So you just can't go far enough to get away from other people. I've tried. We used to do really high altitude, kind of really deep elk hunts, very physically exerting. And you get past the lazy people to the ambitious people. You get past the ambitious people to really ambitious people, 3, 4, maybe 5 miles in. Once you get past them, then you start getting into like the llama and the pack mule people. And once you get past them, you get to the horse and the riding mule people. And right about there, you start hitting outfitter camps. And then by that point, you're pretty much coming out the other side. So understand that there are definitely places you can go where you have an advantage, where you don't see as many people, but a lot of the time it's not you against the elk, it's you against the other hunters, trying to figure out where to position yourself so that they help you instead of cut off the herd and bang away and cripple a bunch and never recover one, which I've seen. So you don't have to go super deep if you're not set up to do that. If you're not in good enough shape to do that, don't think you have to go in for miles. We shoot most of our elk within a half mile of the nearest trail. So that was our first mistake, is thinking we could get far enough in to get away from people, and it just never happened. And again, I'm not saying you can't. It's just, I don't have time or money to go out there and scout for weeks ahead of hunting season. And even if you do, again, everything changes opening morning. The locals, I'm sure, have a much better idea when you have weeks or months to look around the mountains. I'm sure there are spots where you can get away from people, but as a guy that has 5 to 8 days a year to commit to elk hunting, I'm not finding them very well. Second mistake we've seen is not understanding your vehicles the way you should. So elk hunting is obviously later in the year, dealing with a lot of altitude, a lot of really rough, crappy trails, dangerously steep trails, and at times a lot of snow and ice. So we've been fortunate. We're from Minnesota. We understand snow and ice and cold and four-wheeler chains and tire chains. But I've seen a lot of people get into trouble out there that didn't understand that. And I don't want to pick on people from the South, but if you've never lived that life and experienced it, you see a lot of really poor decisions. We've seen vehicle rollovers on the mountain, many people stuck, some stranded for very long periods of time. Some had to leave equipment behind for the year. So just understand that if you're going out there and you're not from a place where you're used to snow and ice, really do some research, look into some tire chains for your vehicles, definitely some for wheelers or side-by-sides if you're using them. Understand how to use that, make sure there's clearance between the chains and all of your brake lines, your supporting structure. A lot of guys don't put them on and really try them out, and they get out there and realize they're not going to work. Keep a really good toe strap, something to put air in a tire. Should you lose air in a tire plug kit, jump pack, just stuff like that. And I had a guy coming up a couple years ago in a Subaru. He passed our base camp and he stopped and he said, you know, how is it up there? I said, rough. You know, you're not going to get very far in that. And he basically said, it's a Subaru. And he went tearing up the mountain. And he came down, I want to say about 3 or 4 hours later, and stopped by and said, yeah, you were right. I said, how far did you get? He said, not very far. It took me about 3 hours to shovel myself out. And thankfully he had a shovel. I mean, eventually somebody would have wandered across him. But just understand that just because your vehicle's great in a little bit of mud or a little bit of snow, you know, you can be at 8,000 feet and there's no snow, and 10,000 feet and there's 4 feet of snow. So it's just very different. Keep appropriate gear with you, again, especially in the vehicles. You know, whatever you need to fix those vehicles, extra belts for the side-by-side, stuff like that, and then actually understand how to change that stuff and have the tools with you need to remove the belt cover, to release the tension on the clutch, stuff like that. You know, same thing with the pickup. If you get it doesn't hurt to throw in an extra belt for that. Again, tire plug kits, something to put air in a tire. You can be out there for long periods of time by yourself. Again, odds are eventually someone will wander by, but it's really nice if you can self-rescue and fix stuff. Same thing goes for hunting, especially if you're spike camping. You know, bring what you need with you. And later down the list, you're going to hear me say, don't bring unnecessary stuff. But I always keep enough gear with me, even if it's just a day hunt. If I'm riding the wheeler up and just doing a day hunt and riding back down, in my pack, I keep enough stuff with me to survive the night, no matter what the weather. So always a puffy coat, puffy pants, wind jacket, wind pants, fire starting kit, small first aid kit, you know, stuff like that. Just always be prepared to have to spend an unintentional night somewhere where it's really uncomfortable. You know, emergency blankets are super cheap, the foil ones. And keeping that stuff with you, it's light, right? If you have good equipment, all of that stuff is probably going to weigh 7-8 pounds. Keeping that stuff in your pack also gives you a much nicer platform to shoot off if you're somebody that likes to shoot across the pack. So another mistake I've seen a couple times is simply not being able to shoot, not expecting to see elk. So the first elk we ever got, I shouldn't say that. The first elk I was ever present for, we got some before that, but I was there, just one other guy that I knew from the military. We split up, and thankfully we were high enough. We got cell signal, and he texted me, and all the text said was elk help. So he was able to text me, kind of clue me into where he was at. I was able to go over there, and basically he had left all his stuff just on top of the ridge by the four-wheeler and just went walking with his rifle, which, again, not knowing any better, seems logical. It's nice and light, you know, you're just walking around checking and glassing. But the problem was he found elk, and then he had absolutely no means of taking that shot. He had no bipod, no shooting sticks, no pack, you know, nothing at all to support a longer shot. So I ended up crawling over to him. I gave him my shooting sticks. I think it was my trekking poles that I gave him. Got my pack kind of situated under his right elbow. He was able to make a good shot and take it out. But just don't, and that's not the only time I've seen that happen to us. So anytime you're moving around, you know, take what you need to make a good 300 or 400 yard shot with you. Don't leave it behind, because the one time you think you're just going to walk over the hill to take a piss and go on a small walk is when elk are suddenly going to show up. So always have what you need to shoot with you. If you have a bipod, that's great. You know, I would still bring something to support the rear of the gun if you can. But again, we've run into that enough times, it's worth mentioning. Not practicing from field positions. Again, this is a big one. You know, it's very different shooting elk out west. The first elk I ever shot was a bull. I was ready. I had shooting sticks. I had my pack next to my elbow. So when they came out, you know, I thought, wow, this is going to be great. The problem was they took a different route than I was expecting. They were going down fast toward the bottom of the ravine, and typically they'd go around then the point, and I wouldn't have been able to get a shot. So I ended up leaving everything other than my pack. I literally grabbed my pack, jumped up, ran about 80 to 100 yards down the hillside so I could see if they ended up cutting that other way. And I ended up taking a 420 yard shot just off the top of my pack standing up. So I stood it up between my legs, rested the rifle on top of the pack, and that's how I made the shots. So practice those positions again. Just when you think you've got it figured out and your bipod is going to be perfect, you're going to find yourself in a really weird situation. or sitting on a really significant angle where that bipod just doesn't work. So practice shooting off the pack with it standing up, practice laying the pack down and shooting off it, just different positions that you might find in the mountains, because what you think is going to work great just often doesn't work great. Let's see. Angles too is another thing. Obviously modern rangefinders compensate for angles, which is outstanding. You don't really have to worry about that. They'll give you true ballistic range, but understand that shooting at angles can really throw you off. So that first one I took was well below me. I had never had an opportunity to shoot that way. I live in, Minnesota, where everything is flat as can be. And I realized quite quickly that shooting down at a pretty steep angle, the eye relief on my scope was not proper for that, right? It sucked. The scope was way too far forward for shooting down. And it made for kind of a really uncomfortable shot position. So, I know it's hard to replicate in flat country, but try and get some practice shooting up, or at least pointing up at really steep angles, pointing down at really steep angles, so that when you get out west, you're not shocked like I am and all you see is just black in your scope, because your scope is not set up properly for a steep downhill shot. Also understand that animals out in the mountains are at weird angles. So that first time that bull stopped, he was like quartering away with his front end uphill, and it was very steep over there. The front end was probably 3 feet higher than the back end, and it completely threw me off. Like I had never in my mind pictured where to hold on that type of a shot. And again, I froze. I wasn't sure. It just looked completely different than everything you see on TV. So fortunately he did turn pretty much broadside. But understand, just try and watch some videos, picture those strange angles, and figure out ahead of time, where would I hold if his front end is 3 feet above his rear end, or vice versa. Again, that's not something I was experienced with, and it really kind of messed up my mind. Not minding the weather. So if I could give somebody the best advice they could get, it is, if there is bad weather coming in the mountains, get out. So I'm talking blizzards, snowstorms. We have fled the mountains before about 3 blizzards over the years. I've come out there after blizzards and found guys, whose equipment was abandoned up there for days, sometimes weeks, because they just can't get it out. So never underestimate, snowstorms in the mountains. If it's a couple inches, a few inches, you can probably deal with it. If they're talking really bad weather, really strong winds with snow, or blizzard conditions, really heavy snowfall, my advice would be get out of the mountains. Let it settle down for a day or two and then work your way back up. But I had a buddy that went out one year after a bad blizzard, and he had a big tracked Kubota, and he spent like the first 2 days just making money pulling people off the top of that mountain, because there's just no way to get out of there in those type of conditions. And don't put that on the poor rangers that work out there. They get enough stuff to do without having to go and rescue people that are too stupid to leave the mountains when there's a blizzard coming. Not using good gear. So I haven't had too many issues with that. You see a lot of people have some issues with that. Just make sure you use good gear. Again, as far as like rifle and equipment, be very careful with a scope that has an adjustable turret that doesn't lock. A zero stop is not a lock. I've seen a couple blown shots because of that. You sling rifles, them things start turning themselves. Suddenly an elk appears. So I would shy away from that completely. But if you do have one, you have to check that turret every single time you take that pack off or that rifle off the pack, or you unsling it, because a couple guys have blown some really easy shots and some nice elk because of that. But all in all, good boots. Try and get a good pack. The best you can afford. There's some good ones out there. Just use good equipment. The last thing you want is, like my brother, when you're using a 15-year-old crappy pack that we got when we were teenagers, hauling an elk quarter off the mountain and one of the shoulder straps tears off. It makes for a really miserable, rest of the trip. So use the best equipment you can. Another mistake, not knowing what to do with an elk when you shoot it. So I'm fortunate. We had tried the gutless method on some deer. Obviously elk are not deer, but I feel like we had it down pretty well by the time we got out there. But you see a lot of people that don't. They I don't know if they don't plan on actually shooting an elk or what, but they get out there and they shoot an elk, and then they literally have absolutely no idea what to do with it or how to get the meat off of it. So no excuse for that. Plenty of videos online. Again, you can practice on whitetail deer. Yes, it's completely different size, but it's the same theory. You got to understand how to deal with an elk quickly and efficiently, right? There's a ton of really good meat there. They're a very large animal. The last thing you want to do is just leave it there rotting for hours in the sunlight because you have no concept of what to do. And I watched a group of 3, maybe late teens to early 20s 2 years ago, shot an elk. Yeah, I won't even get into it. It was very disappointing to watch. They ended up crippling 2, actually getting 1, ran off an entire herd of elk. And then they spent like 4 or 5 hours out there calling like family members trying to figure out how to deal with this elk. And it really ruined the hunting for the other people in that area for a couple days. It was completely unexcusable in my opinion, very frustrating. So understand how to quarter up an elk, understand how to get it off the mountain. Again, you have to have some means of carrying substantial amounts of weight up and out of those valleys, and that can take a lot of work and a lot of effort, man. It is very physically exhausting. So again, get schooled up on how to care for elk. If we keep some emergency blankets with, we can lay the quarters on, keep them clean, get them bagged, and just put some time into it. If you hunt white-tailed deer, do that on a deer. Do a couple of deer, get some practice in before you get out there. That's going to be very important. I will tell you the one thing that really got me on bull elk is mind the dick. So that pecker comes up like mid-body, and when you cut through that unknowingly, you get pissed on stuff. So if you are fortunate enough to shoot a bull as your first elk, like I did, just watch a couple videos on how to deal with bull elk and get the penis cut back and out of the way, because man, that thing is shockingly long. I was not expecting to cut through it like close to mid-body, and I did. Not being comfortable to shooting to 300 yards. So I had spotted the largest bull I've ever seen in my life night before hunting season. I did not have a bull tag. I sent 2 family members after him the next day. I told them exactly where I had seen it. They were able to crawl within 270 yards. And one of them just was not comfortable shooting that far. It ended up, the bull got spooked by us on the backside of the ridge. I had another guy over there with a bull tag. We didn't know they had found it. There's really no good way to communicate in a lot of those places. We jumped a bunch of mule deer, and the bull went up and over the ridge with him, never to be seen again. But he was a true public land monster. They spent minutes within 300 yards of him, and the one guy kept wanting to get closer. So you have to be able to shoot to at least 300 yards in elk country. I'm not saying that you can't get closer, you won't get closer, but that is very big country. That was an enormous bull, probably a bull of a lifetime, and they were there well within range and just never fired a shot. So you have to get comfortable to 300 yards. You have to get out and shoot. You have to practice, understand the wind, stuff like that. That thing should have been hanging on the wall. And unfortunately, he wasn't hanging on our wall. So one of the last things is carrying too much weight. Again, have everything you need with you to survive a night. If you're on foot, carry whatever you want in your vehicles. I have a newer 4-wheeler now with storage compartments. Take what you need to self-rescue off the mountain. But understand that if it's like a high altitude or a backpacking trip, man, I took way too much stuff the first couple years, and it didn't take me long to figure that out. We were dropping everything, extra food, huge med kits, extra clothing, pack covers. We were probably 15 pounds overweight the first couple years. So try and be realistic. Obviously, you want to be comfortable up there. You're not going to stay if you're not, but there's some really good videos, really good lists out there of what you should need or could need. I don't know, I watch a lot of these online videos, I'm sure you do, about people elk hunting, and they're just doing a day trip. They have a base camp, and they have this enormous pack full of stuff. And for the life of me, I have no idea what they have in those packs. Again, I bring what I need to process an elk: game bags, knife, some rope, and then enough clothing, and snacks to survive at least 24 hours if I would ever get stuck on the mountain or get hurt. But don't carry a bunch of extra crap that you don't need. It's just going to wear you down much quicker. Last thing I'll touch on that I've learned, things have kind of changed. So cell phone coverage is spotty. It can be good, it can be bad. I had a satellite messenger. I still do have a Zoleo. It worked pretty good. There was a little delay, but all in all, not bad. Unfortunately, that world is changing. So Verizon now has satellite texting right off of their cell phones. And I feel like, the days of needing a satellite messenger are pretty much gone. I think a lot of other phone companies are following suit. And for the most part now, you can communicate very well with just a Verizon cell phone. Again, there's going to be a delay, but it worked very well for me. So before you go out and buy a satellite messenger, if you don't have one, I would check with your phone company, see what's available. I wasn't even aware I had that until I was up in Canada in the middle of nowhere and it showed up on my phone. So check with the companies. Again, it's important to be able to communicate if you need help, if there's an emergency. I would highly recommend having some means of doing that. If your phone doesn't do that, then the Zoleo or the Garmin are some really good options. But again, I think that market is changing, and I think within the next couple to few years, pretty much all cell phone companies are going to start including satellite messaging. So if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button. Again, I know it's boring just listening to me talk, but these are some lessons that we've learned, again, at doing everything by ourselves with no assistance from anybody out there. And I think there's probably some valid information in here for people that are fairly new to elk hunting like we are. So if you have questions or comments, leave them below. I hope everyone's having a great fall and good luck hunting.